Hi everyone, welcome. Well, my plans began pretty ambitious, thinking that I was just going to grab my shredder here, and I already laid out a whole bunch of stuff that I prepared. So I grabbed some boxes, some newspapers, some paper bags, all kinds of cardboard tubes and other things, and I've even got a place to put this stuff. I reserved a little space on the shelf over here for two bins stacked one up on top of the other, and those are where I thought I'd be putting a whole bunch of shredded paper, cardboard, and other stuff, because my idea was to haul out worms from the horizontal migration feeding zone of these two European nightcrawler worm bins where we've been migrating the worms for some time now. But I think we're going to have to go with a somewhat reduced version of the original game plan. I just found out that I need to go pick somebody up in a couple hours, so I don't have a whole lot of time now, whereas I thought I had a great deal more time. But I'm going to set the shredding stuff aside, and we're going to be checking in on these little guys that have been migrating now for 26 days. That followed a 30-day period of foraging, and that all followed 280 days of composting, 25 feedings, and it seemed like last time, 14 days ago, the material that the worms had been inhabiting, their castings, were almost depopulated already. And at that time too, remember, if you were with me, all the dry stuff that had been out on the top got blended in, making all that material even that much drier and unappealing for the worms to be in. And at the same time, we restocked their feeding zones, a lot of extra moisture added too, besides yummy more food. So it's probably fair to assume that the migration in these systems is pretty close to done, but all we're going to do today is check in, feed, and my homework is still overdue. Getting all that stuff shredded, bins built. I know, I'm a slacker. Whatever, let's get to work. All right, well, I'll be honest, there's nothing that this visit's going to tell us that we don't already know. I mean, I think we know that the majority of the worms are probably already over in the horizontal migration feeding zone on this edge. And man, there's really not much left of this cardboard divider that we installed here to help us kind of keep our finished castings free of bedding type debris. And I think we probably also, well, let's just check. My goodness, look how many worms are out here. Clearly outside the boundary of the horizontal migration feeding zone. I assume that the cardboard just pretty much means nothing at this stage. And I did sort of imagine a sort of a cutoff point where, okay, maybe at some point when you pull out the worms, maybe you'll even bring some of this finished material with them. But it would be kind of nice if they were really more over here in this stuff that's just a mixture of bedding and probably a good many of their castings too by now. So yeah, I'm going to stick to that original idea that we still have the ability to sort of see where the cutoff point is of where we had all the nice finished castings, which I'm going to push over to separate it to some point from where I believe the feeding zone is. And it is tempting to maybe grab another piece of material to sort of aid in replacing what has worn down so much now over time. So I think all that stuff on that other side over there is probably so dry. I mean, if we go down on this side here and we pull out material, totally worm free, totally dry. Once we blend that stuff together with this more moist stuff that was pretty close to the bubble wrap top covering, which helped it stay nice and damp and cozy. I think once we blend all that stuff together, the worms that are in this stuff are just not going to be too pleased with the way it feels. I don't think it'll necessarily injure them or anything of that sort, but it'll clearly come across to them as not as comfortable as being in stuff that's a lot more damp. So yeah, I thought I had most of what I needed set up and ready to go, but I don't have any cardboard on hand that we could use as separators. Wait, what am I talking about? I had a whole pile of cardboard I just set aside that needed to be shredded. So I definitely do have a couple strips of material, which would be really nice, suitable dividing wall over here to not keep the worms out, because it won't keep the worms out. The worms will get in there. It's more to, like I said, keep this stuff over here free of debris, nice clean castings. So yeah, let me go grab what we need for that. All right, I believe these pieces of cardboard here will be very suitable for this. I just have to be careful not to drop this little hitchhiker friend of mine on my index finger here. Little guy came along for the ride, but I was careful not to drop him. And well, you know, this is going to be our chance to check out how the turnout over here is. And it looks to me like there's a little bit of leftover bedding material here still, and also a good many worms that have come over to occupy it. Middle section here too also feels quite wormy. A lot of nice castings piling up in here, but luckily also a good bit of remaining bedding. And I gotta tell you, not much, just maybe little bits of the little divider wall that was sticking above the surface and not in the line of fire of worms nibbling it away, but anything below the surface has got to be toast. So yeah, I gotta tell you, very nice looking turnout in this horizontal migration, but we also definitely saw a good many worms that are still hanging out over in the finished castings. But, you know, what we're going to do next is going to be something that they're not going to like. They're not going to like it at all. But you know what? Before we can do that, I still want to come in here with just a little tiny bit of supplementary bedding. Oops, excuse me. To make this environment a little bit cozier for them. So this this piece of cardboard here, I don't think we need to make the feeding zone a great deal larger. I think its size is pretty good, but I usually, for whatever reason, tend to want to position the brand newest stuff the furthest out, almost as like a simple way of differentiating what part of the horizontal migration feeding zone has been there from the get-go and how much of it might have just been incorporated very recently. So this this nice little jolt of bedding over here is going to go hand in hand with their kind of unglamorous-ish feeding of coffee. I did actually think that I'd be hauling worms out today, so I didn't expect that we'd be feeding, and well, hopefully a little bit of coffee and even my actual worm chow, perhaps a little bit of that too. Perhaps the combination of all three will actually entice the worms to maybe move in and start nibbling on that too, until such a time that we're actually ready to move them out. But I think the big thing is going to be moisture. Adding a whole bunch of moisture to this is really what's going to draw the worms over. But you know, before we do that, but let's not forget, let's make sure we don't forget to do that. Let's not forget, we wanted to kind of incorporate some of this more damp material that was right here on the border with some of this more dry stuff that we know is on the very far opposite side. So I really wanted to try to make sure I get some of that dry over while it's still not blended together with anything. And I'm just trying to be careful here because I feel like I am operating right there at the edge of the rim of the container. So I just want to be careful not to end up spilling stuff all over the place. So I am sort of making this up as I go along to a certain degree. Just in terms of mixing stuff up over here, I don't know if I've really gone to great extents, but I'll admit I kind of thought that there'd be fewer inhabitants of the finished castings over here and more of them turning out. But my hope now is that by blending in all that stuff that was sitting out on the surface dry, combining all this stuff, even breaking up these little chunks that seem to be little sanctuaries for extra moisture to kind of hang tight, breaking all those apart so they can share their moisture with the surrounding materials and eventually just dry off. And man, oh man, are these castings beautiful. So here in bin 1, this is actually where we did a test of a compostable bag. And every now and then I feel like I'm still possibly encountering bits of that. I don't know. I've still got my collection of compostable bag particles. And I suppose if I'm going through this stuff, finding anything that looks like stuff that should have been pulled out by now as a result of us ending that compostable bag test, then I should definitely continue to keep an eye out. But that was kind of our test drive on how to set up our bin here for its third feeding for the ongoing horizontal migration. A couple questions you might be having. Yes, am I going to add moisture? Yes, I am. I'm going to do it right now. Before I forget, I know I forget a lot of stuff all the time. But all this moisture we're using to also rinse my glove is going right down on top of all that fresh bedding we added. But one question you might be having is how much longer? I don't think we're going to need a whole lot much time, you know. Hopefully what we've done here is going to create further incentive for the worms to come on over here where we're creating almost like a bath practically. There's puddles forming. So perhaps we don't have to add much more. We're going to get dirty in bin number 2 anyway, so I don't have to get perfectly clean. But yeah, the other question was, hey, no holes in the barrier? Well, we've been doing this in a couple of my systems now. So this is probably the third time now I'm installing a piece of cardboard as more of a debris barrier than as a worm barrier. And it seems to work fine. The worms seem to figure out exactly what they've got to do to get around it and make their way to where all the good stuff is. So let's hopefully get the job done a little bit more quickly, get bin number 2 over here, and get these little guys fed. All right, bin number 2. And like I mentioned, I think picking up the pace should be possible now that we've kind of got a template to follow and a little bit of experience under our belt in terms of what to expect over here. So yes, we're going to find damp material on the perimeter there with what damp material tends to exhibit, which is worm occupation, because they like the damp stuff. And can you blame them? But I'd like to just sort of establish a rough perimeter here of stuff that I believe is clean castings only. Everything else will just be treated as part of the horizontal migration feeding zone. And then we'll take a quick glance at how the wormies are doing over there. And at the end, when it comes time to backfill our replacement divider, we'll have the opportunity to inspect the finished castings and blend the dry in with the damp. But let's see how bin number 2 over here is progressing with the horizontal migration. Pretty nice from the look of it. I think in the other bin 2 we sort of just like tilled up and inspected that edge furthest from me, and then we sort of checked out the middle section, and then perhaps just one more tilling up of the portion closer to me, and we probably don't need to disrupt them any more than that. Once again, a good bit of residual bedding from the previous 2 horizontal migration feeding zone setups. This to me looks like a pumpkin stem. How do you like that? Certain little stuff that's going to just, end up going with the worms because of its long breakdown time frame. And that looks pretty good. Now, let's not miss anything here as we try to pick up the pace a little bit. I think the next step was just to come in here with replacement divider, position probably somewhere around here if I remember correctly, which would permit us the opportunity to nudge a little bit of stuff over so that we could supplement the bedding supply in here with a couple handfuls before we drop in the yummy coffee and worm chow feeding. Kind of unglamorous from the perspective of colors and vibrancy, but I believe from the perspective of, a good supply of sort of nitrogen-rich foods combined with a little bit of fresh bedding and even a little bit of, I guess, my worm chow being made greatly out of seeds and stuff like that, to me seems like a nice nutritious feast. So what seemed like a good idea in the other bin is something we should probably try to replicate here, which is bringing over the dry all the way over if possible. And then we could begin blending stuff together and really seeing what things look like out here. Out here, this is kind of more like what I was expecting, to go through the material and find very few worms in it. And what is this? Just a big pile of stuff that breaks apart eventually. But it's all moisture doing that. And it seems to me like if it remains that way, it's like a little pocket that can just protect itself from drying. It's no wonder it's so popular for worms. There's always a ton of little worms hanging out in them. But it does seem like if drying the stuff is the name of the game, and that's kind of what it is here, we'll do what we can to help that process along. So, interesting how big some of those little moisture pockets were. And, all right, we did bring over a pretty good bit of dry stuff right alongside the border there. And I think the main attraction is what's coming up next, which is the bonanza of lovely moisture. This is really kind of like the dinner bell sounding off. This is probably what the worms crave the most, is a nice damp spot to hang out in. And it is kind of nice to be able to leave most of this stuff right down here in the worm bin, rinse it off my glove, and reduce what ends up going down the drain to a minimum. So at this point, I guess I've bought myself a little bit more time before I've got to get myself over there to that collection of cardboard, get the shredder out, and whip up some material with which I can create their new home. I think they're ready. I think they're pretty close to being ready to getting moved out, hauled out of here to kick off a couple new systems. But at least this way, the way we've just set them up here, I get that feeling that if it had to wait again, even a couple weeks if necessary, the nice little boost to their bedding, the nice little extra snack we just gave them, that should hopefully tie them over. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.